One of the major challenges with the church in America today is that we have lost our movement mentality. Okay, so let me just take a moment and just share with you one of my personal pet peeves. I have a personal pet peeve with indecisive drivers. Right? Okay. Like I'm sure someone out there feels me with this. Like, have you ever been following someone in a car, or worst case scenario, been in the car with someone who is an indecisive driver? Like they kind of know where they're going, but they're not quite sure how to get there or what route they're going to take. I mean, it even materializes sometimes when they're driving around a parking lot looking for the ideal parking space. All the while they are passing up high quality parking spaces. Like, and right now I can already hear my wife in the back of my mind saying, Seth, be more patient. Like, okay, I get it. But if you've ever been there with me, like some of you out there, you feel my pain. And for those of you all out there who are the indecisive driver, I beg of you, please spare us the agony and make a decision. Like something about indecision just really gets me. And I'll never forget, because I really learned a few lessons early on in my college career about indecision. I realized the effect that an indecisive leader can have on those who are trying to follow them. You see, when I was in college, I was a part of this mission organization that was student-led and student-run, and we literally traveled the world, feeding kids, doing programs, lifting up people, encouraging people, preaching the gospel, and we would just show up to places of crisis where there was some type of catastrophe, and we would just try to encourage the residents or the citizens. I'll never forget, September 11 happened on a Tuesday, 2001. It happened on a Tuesday. We crossed the Brooklyn Bridge on Thursday morning, drove from Huntsville, Alabama to New York City because we just wanted to lift the spirits of those people who were reeling at the loss of their loved ones. One of the things that we would do when we would go to these villages or to these cities is that we had a marching band. And in our marching band, this was not the traditional like college, high school marching band, football teams, halftime show. Like this was a mission marching band. So we would literally march down streets in like two rows. There would be trumpets who let out, and then we have trombones and saxophonists and the quads and the bass players, and we would just be singing songs. We would go by police stations and fire stations and hospitals and homeless shelters. They would hear the music, they would come out, we would stop, we would pray with them, and we would encourage them. Well, in our band, because the trumpets were leading out, the trumpets were always in charge of which direction we went and which route we took. And we had one particular trumpet player who, he was the best trumpet player. And so because he was the best trumpet player, he was always at the front of the band. And because he was at the front of the band, he was the de facto leader. It was his responsibility to decide which route we're going to take. However, this brother, he struggled with making decisions. We would get to a four-way stop, and rather than saying, hey, we're gonna go right or go left, he would just kind of freeze up and have us standing there while he wrestled with which direction he wanted us to go. Worst case scenario, sometimes he would even start going one direction in the middle of the four-way stop, turn, and then decide to go another direction. Now, all of us are in the back, and we're literally pulling our hair out and frustrated because what we realize is that because of his fear of making the wrong decision, he often made no decision. And that left us feeling stagnant, demotivated, and highly frustrated. You see, we were designed to be a marching band, not a standing band, not an orchestra, but a band that is characterized by movement and momentum. And in order for us to have this momentum, we needed our leader to be able to make decisions. One of the primary challenges with the church today is that we have lost our movement mentality. And when we lose our movement mentality and we start getting stagnant, we go from being a movement to now just being a monument to what we were or what we should have been doing. We become a monument, a relic of the past. One of the signs that your movement is becoming a monument is when indecision abounds. And I think Jesus understood this in Matthew 16 when He was introducing the ecclesia, the movement, this unstoppable force, which would become the church. When he was introducing it to the disciples, the first thing he wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page is he wanted to ask that question, have you all made a decision about who I am? See, Jesus, I think, understood that in order for this movement to have momentum and to gain steam, I need to make sure that everyone has decided who I am. And so he asked the question, and they said, well, some say that you're John the Baptist, some say that you're Elijah, some say that you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And Jesus says, well, who have you decided that I am? Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed that to you. And Peter, if you hold on to that decision, if you hold on to that truth that I am Jesus, the Son of the living God, then this movement that I am starting, not even the gates of hell will be able to prevail against it. If you truly understand who I am, that I am the Christ, I have come to deliver and to save and to set free and to empower and to serve people. If you know who I am and you've decided on who I am, then you will know who you are, and you will know that you are an extension of who I am and that you are to continue the movement that I started. That Christ started a movement of serving people, and he has called us as leaders to continue the movement of serving people. The reason why the movement of Christ is struggling in America today is because we are more concerned with survival than we are serving people. We're more concerned about making sure that we don't make the wrong decision than we are about saying, you know what, it might be the wrong decision, but we're going to serve people. You see, if we're not going to serve people, then our default position is to actually preserve the institution. You know what it is to preserve something? Like you make a plate for someone, they're not there to eat it, so you wrap it in cellophane and you put it off on the side because you want to save it for later. You want to preserve it so no one else eats it. Well, for many of us as leaders, there is that risk that we go into this preserving orientation. But Christ did not place us in our churches, in our communities, in organizations to preserve institutions or to preserve our organizations. He placed us there to serve people. So when we go through this COVID, we're not going through COVID with the hope that we can save ourselves during COVID. We go through COVID with a serving people orientation. How can I serve people during this season? Our orientation is not to survive the presidential election. Our orientation as leaders should be, how can we serve people, all people, through this presidential election? Our orientation can't be, how can we save ourselves and preserve ourselves during 2020? Our orientation must be, how can we serve people during this 2020? Serving people requires taking risk. Serving people requires making a decision that I'm going to prefer them above myself because I'm an extension of the movement that Christ started many, many years ago. You know, I'll never forget when I was graduating from college back in 2003, the commencement speaker told a story that literally changed my world. He was a professor at a school in Pennsylvania, and he had to travel to Hawaii for a conference. And the time difference between Pennsylvania and Hawaii was like 3 or 4 hours. And so he lands in Hawaii, he checks into his hotel, he goes to sleep, but he wakes up at like 2 o'clock in the morning because he's still on East Coast time. He wakes up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, says, well, I can't go back to sleep. So he decides to go down to the lobby and just walk around the neighborhood. As he's walking around the neighborhood, he comes into this diner, this hole-in-the-wall diner that's still open at 3 o'clock in the morning. He sits down, no one else is in there, and he starts having a conversation with the owner. All of a sudden, a group of ladies come in, and they kind of sit around them, 4 or 5 ladies, and they're having their own conversation. And he quickly realizes that these ladies are, in fact, prostitutes. So he's kind of like, okay, I'm here, but I'm not here. They have a conversation, and he overhears one of them say, girl, tomorrow is my birthday. I'm going to be 39 tomorrow. Her friend that she was talking to said, well, I don't know why you're telling me. It's not like we're going to throw you a birthday party or something. She said, I'm not asking for a birthday party. I'm just telling you tomorrow is my birthday. As the ladies continue to talk and they eventually leave, the gentleman who's sitting there, he says to himself, the professor, he says to himself, you know what? Let's throw a birthday party for her. The owner says, you know what? That's a great idea. He says, man, these are some good girls. They just got caught up in the wrong thing. I mean, no one is born and grows up saying, when I get older, I want to be a prostitute. Just life happens. And you find yourself between a rock and a hard place. Well, the next day, they got some streamers, they got a cake, and 3 o'clock in the morning, they decorate the diner, and in walk these ladies, and they shout, surprise, happy birthday. And they give her the cake. She is dumbfounded, mind blown, so much so that she can't even cut the cake. She just wants to save it. The owner walks up to this professor, and he says to him, you told me that you were a professor. He said, you're not a professor, you're a preacher, aren't you? He said, well, I do preach here and there from time to time. He said, what church do you belong to? What church do you belong to? And the professor, in a moment which I believe is brilliant and straight genius, Holy Spirit inspired, the professor says, I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes at 3 o'clock in the morning. The owner said, no, you don't. No, you don't. He said, because if there was a church that did that, then I would belong to that church. Don't you want to belong to a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes at 3 o'clock in the morning? A church that has a momentum, serve orientation? Well, that is who God has called us to be. And so we are the answer to one of the greatest challenges in this world, that we must make the decision that we are going to serve.